We're back.
And if you're joining us right now, we are getting our first conversation for this morning started. And as we said before the break, we are talking about relationships. And joining us for this morning's conversation, we have Joan Burke-Skeen, who is the Executive Director of the Belize Family Life Association. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
This is a very interesting and it's a very timely topic, talking about what is a healthy relationship. And we were just speaking a little bit before the break about the red flag trend on social media. So people have been talking a lot about relationships in general. So let's talk about, or perhaps maybe the start of a relationship, when people are just meeting and maybe they feel that spark. And what should people, let's say, be looking for, let's say, in the first place when it comes to forming a relationship, or when, if they feel they're ready for one?
Okay, good morning. For me, I cannot talk about a healthy relationship without talking about the relationship within the home, right? Because relationships start within the home. And you talk about the relationship with the parents, the relationship, the parent-child, parent-children relationship, sibling relationships, because that's where some of the essence of relationships are being formed. And so for you to be able to enjoy a healthy relationship, the appreciation of relationship had to be formed within an environment that nurtured relationship. And so therefore, based on your question, when do you realize that or recognize that you're ready for a relationship? From the time that you have the sufficient sense to recognize, okay, there's something going on, whether between a brother and a sister, and understanding that there are boundaries, understanding what to look for, understanding you as an individual. Those are some of the things then will help you to determine whether or not you're now ready for the kind of relationship that we'll be talking about later on. Because if you're not prepared, if you don't even know yourself, if you don't even know what is it that you want out of this relationship, then it's going to be extremely difficult to determine whether or not this relationship is for you. And the only way you can do that is knowing yourself. What are some of the things that I want? What are my boundaries? And then when you're relating with this individual, you can say, okay, is this person able to give me what I want based on how I value myself, what is it that I want, and what are some of the boundaries that I set.
Okay. And I was going to say, I love where you started with the question about starting in the home and what you experience and what you learn being the basis of that, or let's say the foundation. So I'd like to actually, dive into a little bit more about that, about the importance of, the impact of, the relationships and your own relationships with your family and stuff that you experience when you're growing up, and how that impacts you later on when you perhaps want to start your own family or your own relationship type.
Yeah. I remember having a conversation with this gentleman, and he said, I have 3 daughters. And whenever they reach to a certain age, 15, 16, I am their first date. I take my daughters out to dinner, and I show my daughters how they are to be treated. So I open the car door, I pull the chair, I respect them, right? Because they know that that's the basis or the basic expectations that they should have in forming a relationship with an individual. Now, if you don't have a healthy, nurturing environment, then it's extremely difficult because you don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Right? And so basically what you were born into, where your formative years, that's the environment within which you survive.
Yeah.
You will think that that is the norm. And so you will go out there looking for nothing less, because that's what you're used to. And so that's why it is critical. We talk about parenting. We talk about having healthy environment, healthy understanding of who you are before you then jump into anything that you feel like, okay, you know, this is what I want for the rest of my life. The family, I believe, and you have sufficient studies to show that that's the core.
Yeah.
The family and whatever we want to define as the family. Because with all the changes in the world today, you have different forms of family. But whatever that group is that will provide you as a young person, as a child, as an adolescent, to help you form who you will become later on, is critical to an individual's life.
You know, at the core of what you're saying is the modeling that takes place. And that gives us an opportunity to kind of step back and see the culture of what we consider to be healthy relationships in this country. I think we've dived into the topic before that in Belize, we don't have a dating culture.
No.
We don't have the idea of exploring what you may like or be attracted to in other people. It just becomes kind of you end up being in a relationship with somebody after talking, and that's it. You're tied to them moving forward. But then we see things erupt every now and again. You see women fighting. You see, especially with social media, where some people do put it all out there. You see people speaking about others and talking about who have my man or who not have my man or the my man. And that's just from the female perspective. We have men who are targeting exes by producing explicit photos and videos. And so we can see that there's something missing in the foundation of the relationships that we're teaching children to build. Now, Joan, you have worked with young people at BFLA looking at things like sexually reproductive health rights, looking at empowering young people, educating young people. What's the sense that you get when you see where we are today?
When I look at what's happening today, and we look at the values in our society, what is it that we value most? We look at our young people and it goes back. If you don't know the self, if you don't have respect for the self, if you don't have respect for others, because a lot of what we're seeing in our society today is basically lack of respect, and respect across the board.
Yeah.
Because we look at something as simple as theft. Okay? I believe that it is okay. So if you have something and I want it, I could take it, and there are no consequences.
Because you have luck.
Yes, right? And there are no consequences. And those things again goes right back to the home. We have lost the value of that, the foundation, which is the home. So now we find some young persons, or majority of young people, they are liberated at different levels. And so we believe that liberation means that we can do just about anything without any boundaries, without consequences. Having worked with young persons, and again, depending on where they're coming from, and I always maintain that financial resources, what you have, what you don't have, education, first we would think that those were protective values, but you have young persons from all different walks of life. That sometimes you look, oh my God, that is Mr. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so child, and they're behaving that way. That's no longer a protection, because sometimes when you go into those same environment, you realize that there are certain factors that contribute to why our young people behave the way that they behave these days, and there are no consequences. And what do we value now as a society? And we have to step back as adults and say, okay, what is it? Because we are the ones who created the environment for the young people. The environment that we have today, we created that environment. So we have to step back and ask, where did we fail? The experiences for some young people in the northern part of the country, in the rural areas, might be completely different than that from the urban setting. And sometimes we could even go into certain cultural aspects as well. What is being accepted as a norm?
I wanna, if I could just jump in there for a moment, because that's interesting, and that triggers a prior conversation with Dr. Herbert Gale when he talked about the state of couples in Belize. Now, every time we get, just like how there's this myth that there are more men than women in Belize, the population is almost 50-50, one. But there's also this belief that they're predominantly single-parent households in this country, and that's not the case. We do have the majority of households that have father and mother at home. State and health of the relationship is a different story.
Thank you.
And then you have pockets, like urban centers here in Belize City, that may have a higher rate of single parenthood. So when you say that and you tell me about different dynamics for urban and rural, that's one of the things that it triggered. But what are we talking about here? Like higher domestic violence in one area, higher, I don't know, divorce or separation rate in another area? What are some of those differences that you've identified? Let's go rural and urban.
I just want to make one thing clear. Having two quote-unquote parents in the home doesn't mean that there is strong parenting. Having the male figure who is, we'll say the father and the mother, does not mean that the environment is a nurturing one and one that will contribute positively to the growth and development of children. Right now, when we look at the issue of urban-rural households, and we know for a fact the Belize, like the rest of the Caribbean, we are seeing an increase in divorce rate. And the causes of divorce are many. Now, in the rural setting, where I believe, and depending on how rural is that setting, the values in rural setting could be completely different from those in the urban setting because of access. Access to information, access to certain resources, and we find that there is still, in some of the rural areas, there's still an approach to this community kind of life, where that is a support mechanism for young people or support mechanism for children. Now, when you come to the urban area, there's much more access to social media, for example, and we tend to be more competitive in some of the urban areas. So you find what will affect the life of a young person and how it affects the lives of young persons in some rural communities might just be different than what we are experiencing in the urban area. We look at, for example, and going back to Dr. Gale's report, we do know that the unresolved hurt, or we have some deep-seated hurt. And one of the things that we recognize in more rural areas, and depending on culture as well, is the issue of abuse, sexual abuse that we've come to learn to live with, right? Or it would appear that we have accepted that and have learned to live with it. Now, as we move from that stage into a relationship, an intimate relationship, some of those hurt manifest themselves in an intimate relationship because of the fact that there are still scars or there are still wounds that have not been healed. So even now when we reach to that point, to be able to say, okay, this is who I am. This is what I want. And it's a facade.
Just dive into that really quickly, because that's such a critical point. One, we've never done a full comprehensive study to know how the state of the problem of sexual abuse in this country. Anecdotally, I know organizations like yours and other mental health professionals and agencies will be able to tell you it is far more predominant than we care to acknowledge. And we're talking from grandparents, parents, and now with the children, that they have been exposed to abuse or abused themselves. They don't talk about it, they don't do anything. So when you talk about that trauma, it's not just if the child itself was abused, sometimes the parent was abused, and they project in how they're raising their child with some of these, well, without having some of the important values.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Yes. And the prevalence of abuse, whether emotional, physical, sexual, all forms of abuse, is higher than we would want to accept. And sometimes we fail to recognize the impact of abuse on the lives of individuals. Presently, there is a project, a regional project, the Spotlight Project, to address ending violence against women and girls. And when we go back to a home where all we know of is violence, and sometimes people feel that only the physical violence should be looked at, but the emotional violence, the psychological, has for some, both women and girls, boys and men, more a long-lasting effect. We talk about helping and hurting words. We talk about certain behaviors that are being displayed among parents that we believe, hey, children don't see.
Oh, gosh.
But children are very sensitive. And it's very unfortunate that hurting people hurt people. I can recall a member for YAM, or Youth Advocacy Movement, had done studies. He did his thesis among young men in prison in Belize. And I think it was about 87% who said that they hated their mothers. And when asked why, they said because all their mother represent in their lives is violence. Right? And they felt that, you know, my mama beat me for no reason. But when you go back and if further analysis was done, we very often, when especially a mother is in an abusive relationship, she cannot beat on the man with the beater. So what she does, she takes it out of the persons closest to her, her children. And so these young men, we had one in particular who said that he would never, ever, ever want to father a child because he didn't know his father. But his mother would hit him almost every day and tell him, you're just like your pa. You look just like your pa. A man who he didn't choose to be his father. And he didn't even know who his father was.
Yeah.
So those kinds of hurt and behavior then translate into how you relate when you become an adult and forming your own relationships. We spoke earlier, or you asked earlier about this whole thing of possession. And this is my man or my man.
Or like women attacking women when there's a male in this equation that's been cheating.
Right. And again, it comes out, okay, what is it that you want? What are some of the red flags? Right? When you get in there. And you mentioned earlier that we don't have a culture of dating. The last week a young lady said to me, it's not a young lady, she's adult, said she's out of a relationship and is going into one, and she was talking with this guy and he said, you know what, I would prefer for us to go on a couple dates to get to know each other, so that we can have very, very frank and open conversation. And she said his response that you watch too much Lifetime. Right? And it's simply because the culture that we have now, it is so easy for hookup.
Yeah. And hookups end up in steady relationships, a pregnancy, then a marriage.
And sometimes it might end up with a pregnancy, but then maybe not marriage, because you know what, no? Maybe the male was just looking for fun. And because, again, you come back, what is it that you want? Have we sat down and have the conversation? I mean, even when we look at pregnancy, and it's very sad, the amount of teen pregnancies that we have in Belize, the amount of mothers.
25% of live births?
Well, and that varies again from district to district, right? And I'm not sure of the exact figure for this year, but again, you find that so many young girls find themselves being single because, you know, hook up with a guy, he never ready for a child, right? Maybe she herself wasn't ready. Or you feel that, and there's still this belief that if I get pregnant, I want to keep him. And it is such...
Not because he has the values that I want in a partner, but because now we have a child.
We have a child, and a child sometimes causes further division than bringing you together. And it's very unfortunate that we see very often, and with social media now, you're seeing all these scandalous posts, and yes, this is my man, no, this is my man, and here he is in the middle. Maybe there are 2 or 3 other who could join the fight too. But then again, it comes back to what do you value? And even as a young man, because it is not a behavior that is acceptable whether for females or for males. But what are some of our societal norms, right? Because again, it comes back to what do we value as a country? What are certain behaviors that we expect of males? What do we expect of females? And how do we communicate these without sending mixed messages?
For sure. And you know, that was actually going to be exactly where I was going to go with my next question, because we've been talking sort of like, let's say gender issues and how it impacts. And you know, you gave the example earlier of what could happen, say, perhaps, you know, a mother who has experienced sort of abuse, you know, then visiting that abuse on her own children. And if we look at the other example, and we also spoke about the issue of possession, and when it comes to men or male and the way that we're socialized, being possessive, almost to the point of obsession or violence, is something that we often see. And we also see men who have been raised in abusive households end up being abusers and go to the extreme of sometimes you see murder suicides with with their partners, and they're unable to accept when if the relationship is at an end or things like that. So can we talk a little bit about that and perhaps the destructive ways in which this thing can affect the different genders and let's say men in particular?
When going back to the issue of possession and looking at relationship where we feel that there is one partner in the relationship has more authority over the other, or is the more dominant of the two, it further then lends to the not respecting the rights of an individual, respecting that I am my own person, and don't try to form me into something that you think you want. When we find that this whole issue of violence, and we know that almost 90% of gender-based violence, are men who are actually the perpetrators for whatever reason, and there is absolutely no excuse, right? Going back to the gender norms and the social norms, which then drive some of these behaviors, we have a society that I think, and unfortunately so, that we have come to accept. And when we ask ourselves, what do we have in place for somebody who recognizes, I have the tendency to display this behavior. Where can I go and get help? Or is it accepted that, man will beat woman no matter what? Or is it accepted that the women must continue to be submissive and understand that the man is the dominant figure, regardless? Now, if a woman or anybody wants to leave a relationship for whatever reason, the individual who doesn't have the power to make that decision that, no, you will stay, right? Then when you go out there, and the ego then comes into play, because if, especially for a woman who recognizes that she's in a dangerous relationship, all the red signs are there, and decides to leave, it's not easy. And at times you ask, but why you stay? We have seen not only women, but young girls being killed because they know there's this fear that is instilled in them. And sometimes it's a situation of insecurity on the part of the male as well. Because even though in most relationships, the man wants to be that person in control. And if the woman or the female decides, I am going to leave, that's the feeling is that I am losing control. And it's how my friend they want to think, and I want to look weak. And they say, no, I want to assert my power. I will make sure that you don't leave me. So the violence then escalates and then end up into death, as you mentioned, or the building of fear that the individual who is being abused have lost all identity.
Yeah.
They've become somebody that they don't even recognize. And because everybody is so busy doing our own thing, that family network and support that once existed is no longer there, unfortunately. And also people tend to remain silent because of issue of trust. So there are multiple factors that would then contribute to, okay, why we have this situation now.
Yeah.
And it brings up to my mind what is a real big question is that, let's say if you are raised in sort of an environment and that's all you know,
Yeah.
how is it that you build that awareness? And especially, like, let's say, back to the very first question that I asked about how you know if you're ready or whatever, but what are signs of, let's say, what are the red flags or, abusive relationships, so that, if you didn't know before, that you can be aware of so that you can govern? It doesn't necessarily even have to just be a personal relationship. Recognizing those power and those dynamics that could lead to abuse. How can we do that, or how do people in society do that nowadays?
Well, the signs are many, and the issue of power and control. Sometimes you find, okay, simple things like if you're on your phone, who you to talk to? And what they say, right? If you're going out, when you to come back? When you go out with your friends, you get 50 phone calls, during that time. You have things like you can't wear certain clothes.
If I could
Right?
just interject there, and I know you work with young people, so you know this well. Sometimes people are flattered by this type of attention.
Love.
And that's where, and that's why I think it's really interesting, because what, from the outside looking in, you say, I mean, if he's telling you what to wear and who to talk to or who not to talk to, then that's concerning. But for the person in the relationship, they see it as love.
Yes, and they say, he loved me, or she loved me because, look, see, they call me
Watch how
again.
you're going, yeah.
Watch it. Or determine who you can speak with, who you can't speak with. You find a number of girls and women are saying, I can't go visit my family like how I want. Or like basic things that you would say, hey, listen, as an individual, I have the right. Like simple things like certain shows you're not allowed to watch. You would be surprised to know the level of control in what we call girlfriend and boyfriend relationships.
Yeah.
And those are red flags that we very often mistake them as love.
Yeah. And it goes
they care.
back to behaviors that were modeled in the household.
In the household.
It even goes with cheating,
Exactly.
I think it's interesting when you said, not because you have mother and father in the house means that you have a stable
protective
foundation for a healthy relationship. I mean, we know that very often you learn love or learn what relationships are like from your parents. And if mom accepted physical abuse or accepted being cheated upon consistently, and everybody know, even the kids at some point, when that little girl or little boy grows up, they think that's what relationships can and should be.
And
Right.
before you answer, because it actually triggers a memory that I had of a young person actually, and I was very surprised, about 7 or 8 years old, saying something about, oh, my daddy, they with this next woman, and they were aware of the fact that their parents, 7 or 8 years old, and you would think that they're not paying attention to these sorts of things, but they picked up on it. And I remember hearing the child say that, and I was surprised that they would have known, but it's the behaviors that they learn, and they're aware of things that we don't think that they are. So, I guess
it's either going to be that they grow up thinking Cinderella, I'm going to be saved by a prince, because that's the first story of love, or what I see mom, dad, or mom and boyfriend, or dad and girlfriend have.
And it is interesting when we talk about what we accept. I know even when we started doing work in HIV and AIDS in Belize, it's like, okay, we know that persons with uniform services, in the uniform services, have this behavior. So we know that like customs officers, they want to have one picnic in every district where they work. We know that that is the same for police, the police. We know that that's the same for BDF. We know that the BL, the linesmen who have to go all over the place, they want to have one. And you know what? It's like, hey, these are trophies that these men are getting. So we already know that this is the society within which we were. So let's accept it. Nothing is done to say, okay, how is this one impacting on homes? Because then that is why you see the family court is so busy, right? Because these individuals, are they making sufficient income to then maintain all these children? So he might have one place that he calls his home, so that's where he resides. But then what happened to all these children? You have one that's San Antonio, you have one that Benke, all over. And so these are children who only know that, you know, my father was a custom officer or an immigration officer, but there is no relationship. So here you have a woman who might then find herself probably getting in another relationship to try and maintain. And then you find all these children growing up feeling that this is the norm, right? So when we go back, and I always go back to the home where there's the foundation. This is not to say that you do have persons who grow up in such homes but have made the conscious decision that this is not healthy for me and want to make a difference and make that difference.
But logically that means at some point in their growing up, there was an intervention of sort, whether they sought it themselves or organizations stepped in or school helped to instill the values that they didn't see growing up. And I don't mean values like, you know, you're gonna have the the house with the white picket fence. I mean, going back to this is my worth and this is what I deserve. So let's talk about some of those things. We're running out of time so quickly. It's looking at what, and I know your BFLA has worked with young people, so you can tell us a bit of how you work with young people to help to nurture that sense of self and self-worth and care for them to be able to have some of the tools they need to build healthy relationships.
Well, we start from the point that we allow young people to see that they are their own individuals and individuals with rights. And we go back, Marlene, you will know, we talk about the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which is one of the pillars that we use for individuals to say, hey, listen, as an individual, and we go back to looking at the individual as a person created in whatever being created by God, created by whoever you believe in, but an individual who is special and unique. And knowing that you have the right, and what are some of your rights? The right to say no, the right to be who you are, the right to reach your highest achievement, and that nobody should then dictate to you in a way that you feel that your right is being, or your rights are being violated. We also teach them that with rights come responsibility. And how do you go about making responsible decisions and recognizing when a situation is about to occur that can violate those rights, and that you do not set double standards. And especially in relationships, you set your barriers and you do not compromise if you don't feel that that is worth a compromise. And always be in control of self, and understand that there are individuals who might come looking like a prince or a princess. How do you recognize that this is not healthy for you? We know that we have young persons are bombarded with different messages. But we at the Belize Family Life Association, working with young people, we said set your goals and work towards your goals. If, even when you get into a relationship, if those individuals, if you don't share the same goals, the same values, then that person is not right for you.
And that doesn't make him a bad person. That's just not your person.
That's not your person. You know, if you want to have 5 children and this person say, hey, listen, I don't want no picnic, then you already know step 1. That will not work. Don't think that you can change. Or if you want a certain career, you know, certain career.
There's a lot of shaking heads around here.
Right, certain career, and they say, you know what, no, I want one, I need one stay-at-home mom. My picnic for be raised by their mom, and you want to be a career person, you already know that that is not for you. Don't hope that, you know what, maybe you might change your mind, or some people change their mind, but it's very rare when they change their minds. So from very young, you put your own self-worth. You have to know what you're worth.
Oh, Joan, we could go on with this. We need to do a series 2, I'm sure, with people asking questions online, but we're completely out of time. Great a point to close off on, though. I think that's really driving the point home of where healthy relationships start in the household, but then also in establishing your own boundaries. Thank you so much. And of course, BFLA does presentations like this if people need to contact you all.
Definitely.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be joined by representatives of credit unions in Belize talking about International Credit Union Day. So please stay tuned.